Good afternoon and a very warm welcome again to this community of practice session this afternoon. And it is really, really very nice to see so many participants attending this session on a Saturday afternoon when, one is tempted to take a snooze or rest. But then, having all of you here just means that we're all like-minded people and we really want to know more about how we can help our students have better experiences. And so that's really heartening. And thanks for attending our sessions. And thanks again for some of the our participants saying that it is really helpful for them. It really keeps us also motivated. I'm Jayashri Iyer, as you all know, and with me today I have Neha, who is a director at Adhyayan. And of course, a big shout out to Annette, Gauri, because they are our backbone and they work very, very silently behind the scenes for making things possible for us. So thanks very much, Annette and Gauri. And so before we move on, let's do a small exercise and to just become aware of ourselves a little bit. So let's just kind of pause for say about 10-15 seconds and bring your attention totally to yourself. And maybe if required, sit straight. If you're not sitting in a comfortable position, make yourself comfortable, keep your back straight. And if you want, you could close your eyes and take a few deep breaths, a deep inhalation, and exhale slowly, a long exhalation. Do this a couple of times at your own pace and bring your awareness to how you are feeling now. What is the emotion that is predominant for you right now? How are you feeling? What is your mood? Become very aware of how you are feeling now. I would request Annette to share a Mentimeter link on the chat. And please access this Mentimeter link, copy this Mentimeter link or click on this Mentimeter link and go to this page. And there is a question. Just type in a word or a phrase that best describes your current feeling, your current emotion. What is your mood? Type in a word or a phrase to describe how you are feeling now.
I think that it's another one on the Mentimeter. It says, according to you, how... Okay, sorry. It has changed. Sorry. It has changed.
So maybe we could also share the Mentimeter page for us to see what responses are coming in.
Annette, will you be able to share? Not sure, Annette?
Is Annette not there?
She's there in this session.
Yeah, she's there, but right now, is she? I think she's, just a minute. Annette says her screen is stuck. Will you be able to share, Neha? Not able to?
No.
Okay. All right. So I think we'll just take 10 seconds and then we'll go on to the next slide. Can you put the next slide, Neha? Will that be possible for you?
No, actually, I haven't looked into the Mentimeter.
Okay.
No, I don't have the login.
No issues.
I just, yeah.
So
Maybe we could have it on the chat. We can all add it on the chat.
Either chat or unmute and speak. There are so many ways of doing it. That's all right. So yeah. So if you are if you've already typed in your mood, so my next question would be to just kind of think how doing such an exercise in the beginning of a class before classroom instruction, how would this help maybe the students or the teachers? How would pausing for a few seconds and asking students how they are feeling right now and what is the emotion that's going through in their mind, asking them that and spending a few minutes on that, how will this help the teacher or the students? Please type it on the chat, or we would love to hear your voice. You could even unmute and speak. A reflective exercise, it cuts off distractions, helps people get more focused. Absolutely. There's somebody, Amit has written, students will feel cared for. Wonderful. It helps in concentration, it helps in feeling connected. Wonderful. It helps the teacher to know how I should go about, because you get to know the mood of the class. It helps children gear up for the class. It helps them feel relaxed. It helps them more focused and connected. Some wonderful responses coming from there. Yeah, preparedness for learning. So they get prepared for learning. That's right. Awesome. So,
Jayashree, I can now present the first one word cloud. If you
great. I think I would like to know the mood of this whole class. I mean, the whole group today. So I think it's good for all of us to know how we are feeling. Wow. Happy is right at the center. It's so beautiful to know that people are happy. And relaxed, excited are some, again, responses that have come in from many people. Grateful, excited, active, hopeful, good.
Calm, exhausted as well.
Somebody feeling exhausted. Okay, yeah.
Feeling low, drowsy.
Yeah.
And it's great that you've pushed yourself to come for the session, even if you're feeling like exhausted and low. So that's inadequate. Okay.
Yes. All right. So yes. So when you pause like this, and then you in the classroom setting, if children take out a little time to express how they're feeling, it not only helps the children, certainly, because they are going to pause and connect to their feeling, become self-aware. It also helps the teachers to know what is the mood of the class, so that she can accordingly go ahead with them. So that's extremely important, to feel connected, as well as for the children to feel cared for. I think these were some great words, very important responses that came up in the chat. Thanks for that. And so taking on from here, of course, social emotional learning, as we all know, is extremely relevant for so many things, and for mental health, for well-being, and more so in today's pandemic times. And it has become extremely crucial, because we know students have had to face huge amount of losses in so many different ways. There are some students who have lost parents, who have lost their loved ones. Some have seen their parents go jobless, reduced incomes. And most students, as we all know, have lost out on socializing with their peers and have experienced loneliness. So the list goes on. So it's extremely become even more important today, in today's times. And another thing, what the pandemic has really taught us is, again, that we should relook at the definition of safety. So normally when we talk about safety, the first thing that comes to us is physical safety, though we kind of all know that emotional and mental safety is important. But then now it has really brought that on the spotlight. So what the pandemic has taught us is relook at the definition of safety for students within the school. And and with this new awareness that has come in, we have to seize the opportunity to kind of take this upon us as educators and take it forward to incorporate socio-emotional learning in the school setting for students and as well as the school, everybody in the school community, and that's become extremely important. And that is why this being the current issue in the school setting, we thought we would have a 3-part webinar series on the socio-emotional learning, how to address socio-emotional learning for school, in the school setting, for students, for teachers, for the community, and a 3-part webinar series because we thought we will take a deep dive into it and to look at it from all aspects of how to really implement it. So the first part last week was, 2 weeks back, was on what is socio-emotional learning and why is it so important. But today we are going to go a little deeper and see how does it really look inside the classroom. And uh, we all know, regardless of whatever is your teaching learning situation, whether it is online or whether it is hybrid or whether it is in person, it is critical that explicit and very intentional weaving of socio-emotional learning has to be done in the curriculum. And that's what we heard from our panelists during the last session. And embedding SEL is really important for a safe, equitable and empowering learning experience for all students. So this is what our panelists really talked about in depth during our last session. So, and talking about research in this field, more than 2 decades of research demonstrates that an educational curriculum that promotes SEL leads to increased academic learning outcomes and also improved behaviors among students. Neurosciences, psychology, and also our learning theories have time and again validated this and said that if students have a strong socio-emotional learning foundation, they can perform much better, and also the behavior problems amongst students really reduces. So, and also another very important and optimistic thing for us as educators is that SEL can be taught, it can be fostered, and SEL skills, attitudes, and behaviors can be actually literally taught and learned in a classroom situation. So this is what we're going to see today. So how does it look like in the classroom? Okay, so when we talk about teaching it, what does an SEL curriculum look like? And if you have to get prepared, if you have to get our teachers prepared to take it inside the classroom, what is it that's required to be done? So these are some of the things that we will really talk about today, and we have two very, very experienced panelists today to talk about this. And they have really kind of worked at really in depth. They've done some in-depth work in creating a curriculum and actually taking this curriculum and getting it implemented inside the classroom through teacher professional development. So they have extensive experience and knowledge about how to do this. They have done it in their own school spaces, in their own individual spaces. So the first panelist is Sankalp Khanna. Sankalp is an education consultant, and he's also the co-author of the SEL curriculum, Identities in Conflict. And this curriculum focuses on identity formation through the lens of gender, religion, and philosophical inquiry. And this is a curriculum he's created for the Heritage Experiential Learning School in Gurgaon. He's also an educational consultant with the Heritage International Experiential Learning School. Sankalp has also been teaching for the last 12 years. And in the recent past, he's worked with the CBSE wing of the Heritage Experiential Learning School as the SEL coordinator for the senior school in the Heritage, at the Heritage. In his role, he has set up a thriving program. He has also facilitated workshops for students and teachers and enabled them to develop more inclusive, respectful, and freer cultures and concepts of self-identity. Sankalp was also responsible for creating a unique student-led clubs program which featured in the Times of India. And he he also set up the Heritage Center for Active Citizenship, and he has taught mathematics for the senior grades. Actually, Sankalp began his education by engaging in learning with children at Mirambika Free Progress School. Here, he worked with children between the age groups of 10 to 15, and he helped connect the students to their underlying aspiration for growth through math, sports, and theatre. During this time, he was awarded a year-long fellowship with the DO School in Germany. As part of this, he did a project on the self with the students of Mirambika and 3 schools in the Uttarakhand region. To expand his field of work, he moved on to creating a culture-based curriculum with children of migrant workers by leading an NGO, Tarang Kala Kendra. Sankalp has a master's in education from TIS Mumbai, and apart from all of this, he loves to run, he does yoga, he reads and writes to aid and to add to his journey. Thank you, Sankalp. We are really delighted to have you, and we are looking forward to hearing and learning from you. The second panelist today, who is very willingly accepted to be a part of us today and to share her experience, is Priya Patil. Priya currently works with the Lighthouse Communities Foundation in Pune as Director Education and Chief Innovation Officer. He is leading the implementation of the social and emotional learning program with the municipal schools in Pune, and she drives new partnerships and collaborations for Lighthouse communities as well. Prior to this, Priya has worked with Child Rights and You, CRY, for a large part of her career. She has also consulted with many other nonprofit organizations in the areas of program design, fundraising, and capacity building. And Priya says when she implemented this SEL curriculum with the municipal school children in Pune, it ended up being a self-discovery for herself. And so through this program, it's been a self-discovery journey for her, as well as she tries, and what she does is to help other people discover themselves through this program. Welcome, Priya, and we are really looking forward to hearing what about your experience and to take away insights from what you have for us. Thank you so much. So I hand over now to Priya, and Priya, over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. Let me first begin by appreciating all of you teachers who are here and clarifying that I'm not a teacher. I'm somebody who's done program management, and I'm working with teachers. And the only reason that I'm here is to just share with you my experience of implementing this program, which led to a journey of discovery for not just myself, but for many other teachers as well. And I think that's really important, because how do we gain from the experience that all you teachers have? That's sitting, the real life classroom experience. How do we bring it together and how do we transform it? I'm somebody who's from the outside. I'm not in the classroom on a day-to-day basis. It is teachers who are in the classroom on a day-to-day basis. And how do we really transform that experience? And that's a little of what I'd like to share with you. So what I thought we would first do is I will share with you a little bit of what our program is about, what are we working on, and then the insights that I have into this journey of self-discovery that Jayashree also referred to. So Neha, if you could just share my slides, please. So our social emotional learning program in the Marathi medium schools of 10 Marathi medium schools of the Pune Municipal Corporation is called Jeevan Shikshan. We decided to call it a name. That was our first step. Social emotional learning is a mouthful, plus children can't say it. And if I look at even, my children have a mindfulness class in their school, and if I look at the expression on their face when they have to attend a mindfulness class, it's not something that's very welcoming. So we said, let's call it something simple that everybody can approach and everybody can look at. And therefore, our class, our social emotional learning is called Jeevan Shikshan. And there's a reason behind it. Next slide, please. So Jeevan Shikshan, and Jeevan in Marathi, or I'm sure other languages too, and Shikshan, typically Marathi, is about learning, is education. Our entire curriculum is based on learning about life and from life. So, our curriculum is a journey of discovery for the self, it's a journey of discovery for the child. Whether it is a 6-year-old child who comes into the classroom in grade 1, who has 6 years of life experience, or a 15-year-old in grade 10 who has 15 years of life experience, every minute of that experience is valued. How do they look at their own experiences and value them? What is therefore the narrative that they tell themselves? Do they have faith in themselves? A lot of this work has stemmed from our experience with youth. We also have another program which works with 18 plus youth, where the primary emotions that are driving youth are anger and fear. And when we worked on this curriculum and on this program, we looked at the learnings from that space and said, what is therefore the inner narrative that I tell myself? What is the negative talk that I look at myself? We all talk about non-judgmental spaces. We've all heard that terminology. Does that even apply to the self? Or am I saying I should not judge others? But so many times we judge ourselves so harshly. So as children, the first step is, do I have faith and belief in myself? Is my classroom giving me a human experience? Am I getting the connection? Am I having fun? Am I getting joy in my classroom? Are children even experiencing this? And in a government school, and I really want to bring the context, we are looking at PMC schools here, we're looking at municipal corporation run schools, we're looking at Marathi medium schools. So it is therefore the children from the most disadvantaged communities who are attending these schools. And therefore, does that school give them that human context, that human connection, or do they sit in class as invisible children, which we see many of the children are? When we do our classroom observations, you look at children and you know that there's a physical body sitting there, and that's about it. There is no engagement that's happening in the classroom. Is the teacher, therefore, just a medium or a deliverer of the textbook? What is the role of the teacher in this classroom? And of course, I talked about that point ahead. Am I invisible? Am I as a teacher invisible in the classroom? Am I as a student invisible in the classroom? Because everything that is centered around me is on the academic experience, is on the academic and the learning outcomes. So when we designed the Jivan Shikshan curriculum, it was designed from the space of working with the self, working with others, working on a journey of discovery for myself. When I'm learning about my emotions, it's not that I can finish in one day. I may learn about fractions and other mathematical and science in a day or a week or a month, but my journey on emotions is a lifelong journey. And can we at least set children on this path towards a lifelong journey where we are aware about the fact that emotions affect so much of what we do? So, how are we implementing our program? If you can go ahead. So, the Jivan Shikshan classroom is designed as a safe, non-judgmental space where the engagement is with you and your life. And who is this you and whose life it is? It is the life of teachers, it is the life of school leaders, it is the life of students. And to give you an example, every activity or every session that happens in the classroom, there is an experience sharing that happens in there, which is from my life. It could be the school leader who has attended that class for a day. The leader joins in, the headmistress or headmaster joins in, shares an experience from her life. It is non-judgmental because when I'm talking about my life experience, there is no judgment that you can make. There is no right or wrong answer. There is no factual information that can be checked that yes, this is evaluated. This is my life experience, and I'm bringing my life experience to the table. I'm learning from my life experience, and when I listen to somebody else, that person is learning from my life experience too. So there's some level of everybody in the classroom being in that same space for those discussions and for those sessions. Let's move ahead. So we are running it in 10 schools where we have 2,000 children. We have 10 school leaders and 75 teachers as a part of the program. The Pune Municipal Corporation has really been pioneering by including the Jivan Shikshan classes as part of the timetable. It is not an after school program. It is very much in the classroom. It is part of the timetable. We have left it to each school has chosen where they want to hold it. Some teachers discovered that if they hold the Jivan Shikshan class right in the beginning, it's helping children come on time. It's helping set children in a very good mood. Some teachers like to do it to wrap up their day and send children home in a different frame of mind. And the most popular one is after the lunch break, because most children are extremely distracted. They have had food, they've gone to play, and they come back. And we've seen it ourselves, where all the teacher has to do is, go outside and shout that it is the Jivan Shikshan class. That's the first time that they have to do it. Now children know, they get back, their mats are spread out on the floor, and they're sitting there ready for the program, ready for the Jivan Shikshan class to start. That's really critical, is to include it as a part of your activity, as a part of your timetable, and not some extracurricular activity then that is automatically interpreted as optional. And how did we really look at the teacher programs? So every month we had 3-hour learning sessions for teachers. We did not call them teacher training programs at all, because it's a space for us to come together and collectively learn from each other. The curriculum is printed in a little handbook. There is reading, the simple, powerful act of collective reading. Each of us reads parts of the curriculum one at a time. And because it's a small group, all grade 1 teachers together, all grade 2 teachers together, it's hardly 10, 12 people. There is a lot of power that we see in that space. People bring their whole selves into that space. They're listening while one of us is reading, and we discuss, we answer doubts, and then we demonstrate. We actually conduct the sessions with each other, however childish they may seem. So, to give you an example, one of our classroom sessions is about children coming together and making an octopus. Right? So, 4 children have to form a group and they have to make themselves into an octopus. First, the feedback from the PMC teachers was that, our children may not know what an octopus is. We said, that's okay, let's try it out. Let them make what they think an octopus is. One, we were wrong. Most children watch a lot of television. They were very clued into what an octopus is. So we were completely wrong on them not knowing, just because they're, children from slums. We kind of made the big mistake of putting them in a stereotype or in a box, saying they won't know what an octopus is. They knew what an octopus is. They formed really interesting octopuses and octopi, and that's what we did in the classroom too. As when we were demonstrating this, when we were doing exercises that involved art, we drew them on our notepads in the training sessions, so-called training learning sessions. We realized how difficult it is to draw my emotion. And that was one of the feedbacks. So there's a lot of art in the curriculum. One of the key feedback that kept coming in the sessions every month from the teachers is our children can't draw. You're making our children draw their emotions and they cannot draw. But what happened over a period of time is the moment children realized that this is not an art class, this is a Jivan Shikshan class. They can draw what they want. They can draw stick figures, they can draw triangular people, they can draw anything and everything under the sun, and no one's marking them on it. It just unleashed their imagination. And the same teachers, after 3 months, told us, our children have started drawing. But it takes that time. So when you ask children to draw the color of peace in their heart, you have 99% children who draw a heart with a shade of pink, white, blue. And you have one child who draws an ECG line. Right? Because he said, can I draw it? वो picture में दिखाते हैं that heart is the ECG line. And there's no right or wrong in this classroom. And he could draw that ECG line. So the teachers changed, we changed our own. So when I talk about my journey of discovery as well, to even conduct these kind of sessions, to facilitate these sessions where in your head you're conducting a training session, but you're not. You're actually conducting a learning session. But we are so used to saying, no, we are doing capacity, because, in your funding proposals, in your permission letters, in your notifications, you're writing capacity building session for teachers. But in your head, you're saying, no, it's a discovery learning session. So how do you even facilitate that and make that different? How do you leave the space in for teachers to bring their views? I think for us as being NGO partners to the program, as being people who are designing the program, we really wanted to create the space for teachers to own this. So there's no script in the handbook, is a guidebook. The teacher reads it once and puts it away and then says what she wants to say in words that she knows her children will understand. The translation has its limitations. So she uses words that her children will understand, the context that they will understand. She doesn't read out from a book that we've given to her. So how does one, so for me as a trainer, as someone who's been doing some type of training programs and capacity building programs, to actually break this open and say, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to sit in a circle, we're not going to sit me facing you all, we're going to sit in a circle and we're going to do this together, was something that worked really beautifully for us, because we got in touch with our own emotions in each and every one of these sessions. That was really important for us. If we can move ahead. So we have monthly, we have 12 exercises, since this is done thrice a week. Every unit, so there are metaphors, there is body work, there is some bit of reflection work, there are a whole series of improvs that are there in the curriculum. So there's a lot of activity in the curriculum that makes it exciting. To give you one more example, we have an activity for second graders, which is about creating the world's biggest sandwich. And in that activity, they can put whatever they want that is hopefully edible in that sandwich. And it's a memory activity, because they have to recall, the 20th child has to recall 19 sandwich ingredients. So it's repetition, it's recall, it's remembering, and it's fun. And you have the child who has never answered in the class. She is the invisible child that I talked about earlier, who's always there in a government school and in many other schools too, who sits quietly by the window, hoping that she never gets asked a question. You have this invisible child who now suddenly puts her hand up, number 4 in class, and says, can I put popcorn in the sandwich? Can I put a vada pav in a sandwich? Can I put shepuchi bhaji in Marathi? They asked, really, can I put stones? Then the other children decided stones are not allowed. Now there's that democracy in the classroom also. Stones are not allowed in our class, a sandwich. And then the teacher brought her own space to it and said, okay, can we cut this sandwich up and serve everybody? So then the whole action of cutting, it became into a second graders, right? They're really tiny. They enjoyed this whole thing. Then it moved on to, when did you eat a sandwich? Who was with you when you ate a sandwich? So this child who's not talking at all is now saying, I had gone out with my mama. He took me out here, and that's when I ate a sandwich at the sandwich wala on the road over here. So listening to my little life experience, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old remembers that little outing with her uncle. Sharing my insights, I'm discovering myself, I'm discovering others. Are we teaching children, therefore, the language of emotional well-being? Even today, when we ask children, how are they feeling? Today, all of us said happy, excited when Jayashree asked us. We know the language of emotions. We've seen children ask saying, "Theek lag raha hai, bura lag raha hai, acha lag raha hai, theek lag raha hai." That's about it. But do I know the difference between anxiety, nervousness, stress, anger, and rage, and frustration? They're all nuances. So, can I actually have the language? Are we teaching children the emotional vocabulary that we would like them to know? And for themselves, not for me. And of course, resilience, which is something that we all need. Therefore, the entire curriculum is based on these principles. I talked about remember, recall, repeat, the whole design thinking, the neuroscience of learning, what's going to form these connections in my brain. And when they're based on my life experiences and somebody else's life story, those connections are formed much faster. So, what are we doing now as far as the COVID-19? We're really struggling, to be honest. We've tried different experiments in the year. When this program was running in the classroom, it was running beautifully. It made a huge impact on teachers, which is something that I will talk about a little later. But what we've tried is 50% of our children only have smartphone access. So we've sent them WhatsApp exercises with Google Forms, and many of them have replied. So one of the, we send them different films to watch. Then there are questions, reflection questions based on the film. Many of the films that we send them do not have dialogues, so that there is no interpretation that's left to the child. It's left completely to the child. We're not putting ideas in their heads. So they liked these exercises, they welcomed these exercises. Currently, over the last 2 months, we've been conducting online sessions via Google Meet just for 15 to 20 minutes, extending it a little by little every day. We did a whole session on who do you think is your support in these difficult times. Pune experienced a really terrible second wave, and people have been hit very hard. And these are opportunities for both parents to talk to children, which they have never talked about before. We had a child who shared that I never realized that I can be at the age of 11 be a support for my parents. Now that's a conversation he's had with his parent that he would have never had before. And similarly, a parent has had a conversation with a child that, who do you think is your emotional support? These are conversations again that have happened because of the program, because of us opening the doors. One of our teachers has said that she felt so good when the child said, I feel safe when I talk to my teacher. I feel I will get the solutions to my problems. My teacher is here to help me. So the teacher felt so fortunate that she was part of the session when the child shared this. It is something she will treasure. So if we go ahead for me to conclude, Neha. Yeah. So I think it's a curriculum that, when we're talking about social emotional learning, fundamentally it is a journey of discovery. Whichever, let it be, this curriculum that we've designed, and there are many other curriculums that are available, the many activities, exercises. I'm sure each one of you is doing a very different kind of program in your own way. It is a journey of discovery. And therefore, how does it become a journey of discovery for every person associated with it? So for me, for managing the program, I'm somebody who's been, the way I call myself is I'm a linear thinker in some way, right? So I would wanted, when we started this program, I wanted to have a program document which clearly details our goals and what we want to do and how we're going to do it and the sessions and all. We didn't have anything. We started off with experiential work. We started off with officers, supervisors from the municipal corporation with a purely experiential program for them to get in touch with their inner emotions. I was honestly lost at that time. I had no approach note, I had no strategy document, I had nothing with which to base this on. Then we started working with teachers in schools. Again, experiential sessions, the 3 hour sessions that we're talking about. Curriculum, yes, was developed, but there was no logic in my head on what this curriculum is all about. How is it going to change people? How is it going to change children? As I experienced it, as I attended the classes, and I was doing classroom observations from school to school, I realized what's happening here. There is self expression. There is all the castle competencies, yes, but children are getting freer to express themselves. A child who has never raised a hand in the class is now asking the teacher, I don't understand this. Can you please explain it to me? That's a huge step for a child to be able to, without fear, say this in the classroom. We had an experience where two girls were fighting in the lunch break, and in our schools, when they fight, it's very, very violent physical fights. And the male teacher didn't know what to do because they're seventh standard girls. He could not hold them and prize them apart like he would have done maybe to two boys who were fighting. And they had just done an exercise in discovering their self-worth, and they had drawn beautiful diamonds for themselves, saying there's a diamond within me. He quickly brought their files. He showed them, see, you've drawn your diamond. Can you look for your diamond at this moment in time? And they stopped fighting. Teachers have used this techniques that they've been taught, whether it's reflection, whether it's breathing, even during the COVID-19 duties that they got last year, where they were going door to door doing contact tracing and COVID testing and checking. The municipal school teachers were all on COVID duties. They all use these techniques to help get in touch with their own emotions. I think and I'd like to close with what one teacher has said to me, and I think that's what stayed with me the most, is that this social emotional learning, or the Jivan Shikshan period in my class, this session, has given me a chance to connect with my children as children and not just as students. Says, ever since I did my B.Ed, years ago, and these are teachers with 20 and 30 years of experience, they think ever since I did my B.Ed, you get so caught up in academic outcomes. It's no fault of anybody's, but I've just lost this opportunity. And when I sit here and I listen to my children laughing, about putting chocolate and spinach and popcorn and maybe stones and paper in a sandwich, and I just connect with them as children, it puts me in a different space. And I think that's the beauty of social emotional learning, for all of us as individuals, is to find the child and is to find the emotions within all of us. So thank you very much for letting me share my personal and organizational experience with you. Let me just check the chat if there are any questions there. So there's a question from
The online. Yeah.
there's a question from Susan. To draw and use art when using online activities. So we've done some artwork on WhatsApp. So we give the instructions on WhatsApp, and so that's interesting. So PMC school children, a lot of the schools are conducting the entire academics on WhatsApp, because many of their children cannot join the online class, or their data runs out, or their parent takes the phone and goes to work. So we are a part of the WhatsApp groups, and the teachers are actually posting exercises on WhatsApp. The children are doing them, photographing them, sending them back. Then the teacher uses markup tools to do the corrections and sends it back to the teacher, to the child. And all this happens post 8:30 p.m. because that's when the child has a phone. We did some activities on WhatsApp. Some of the children drew and sent it back. Many of them didn't. So we did this. It's an iterative method. We are going to try doing it online in our 20-minute online classes. Right now, we're focusing more on speaking.
Okay. But there are some very interesting comments, and I think personally also, listening to you has been so enlightening, Priya. And I think some very concrete takeaways are that this was possible because there was a fixed time set in the structure, in the timetable structure, but it was flexible for the teachers. It could be at the start of the day, it could be the end of the day, it could be sometime during the middle after lunch when the teacher thinks it's most important for the students. So I think that is one thing very important for it to be successful. There has to be a certain amount of flexibility left in the teacher's hands. However, there has to be a system in place where it is there in the structure, in the timetable. And what I also liked is about the continuous capacity building, you called it, whatever it is, whether it is capacity building or however you did. But I think for the teachers to again get into groups and read, talk about it, discuss, deliberate, understand, and then take it back to their classes, I think that's extremely important as well. So, and of course, the whole curriculum itself being a journey of self-discovery for each and every individual who was involved with it in any capacity. I think that is important, because unless that happens, there is no personal fulfillment, and somewhere then it's not sustainable. So when every individual kind of sees a growth, then you can sustain it. I think that's brilliant. I think these were some great insights from what you shared. So I would request the audience to keep the chat flowing, to ask questions. Please keep it going. And I would, I don't know, I think Sankalp has got a small problem. I'm not sure.
No, I'm back.
You're back?
I've logged in. Yeah.
Oh, great. So nice. So yes, over to you, Sankalp. And I don't know how much you could hear of what Priya said, but that was the summary of whatever I said about whatever she shared was about how it is important for us to have a structure in the school system for this to happen really, and help teachers take it into their class. So now we are eager to listen to you and your experience and how it happened in the Heritage Experiential Learning School. Yeah.
Sure, I'll get to that. Thank you, Jayashree. Very good afternoon or evening to everyone present here. It's great to be in a community of practice with each and every one of you over here. I think that's what sort of makes the work that we do more meaningful, that we can together as practitioners get down and discuss things that we're really doing and that are working for us. So I'm really glad that I've been invited for this. Priya, I must say I was able to hear about 50% of what you said, and I found the practice of really getting together in small groups and going over curriculum that's been self-written and really sort of practicing that out before you go into the classroom, that's such a call to vulnerability, and it's so powerful as an exercise. And as someone who's also done that in the community I have access to, I truly support that practice. So thank you for that. All right, I will go ahead and get down to what I was asked to share. Jashi, can you just give me a thumbs up and let me know if
Yes,
the
yes,
what is SEL beta is visible? Great.
Yes, it is.
Great. So I'm actually going to spend the next 15, 18 minutes before we actually dive into the practices and structural changes that we need to do inside the classroom. I want to go back to our previous session where Lamia had shared with us this definition, Castle's definition of SEL, where she had shared that SEL is really the process. It's a verb, it's a doing. And I found this to be super powerful. And as practitioners who are influencing the process, I'd like to sort of begin by acknowledging our role. One of the most powerful teachers that I've had the good fortune of coming across is this gentleman called Parker J. Palmer, who sort of very simply puts that we teach who we are. And what he really sort of talks about is that all our interactions, our expressions, choices form what the students are really taking in. Now, personally, I can take this to a sort of deeper level. And I know for a fact that I project the condition of my own sort of inner world onto the subject I choose to teach, my students, and really our way of being together. The point I'm emphatically trying to make is that all of us sort of really recognize ourselves first and foremost as teachers of social interactions and emotional management. As based on my experience, I can say this with a certainty that students take in more from who we are rather than what we're really trying to teach. So everything that we do inside the classroom is really social and emotional learning. The degree of awareness of this fact really differs whether we choose to acknowledge our role as social and emotional learning teachers, then sort of puts us in a really powerful position and also puts a lot of responsibility on us to really see what SEL inside the classroom looks like. This is largely reinforced by a mounting research that talks about on student learning that talks about that no learning is really possible without students feeling emotionally secure, socially connected to the learning environment. Trust, respect must be very much a part of the air that we're breathing for the space to be a part of deep learning. I know the two things that I've sort of put out over here of what an emotionally safe environment looks like, what a socially safe environment looks like. These are lofty goals that we've sort of put out there. But the good thing about teachers is that we don't sort of lower our aim to meet the process. We sort of constantly go back and refine the process to sort of achieve these lofty goals. So with these ideas in our head and heart, I can share some sort of tangible actions that we began doing in our school. For me, we've sort of dabbled in a lot of things, but SEL inside the classroom can take multiple different forms. It can take the form of dedicated SEL lesson time, whether that's circle time, where you have a dedicated curriculum that's mapped out from nursery to 12. And this curriculum is also sort of adaptive and responsive to the emerging needs of the students. For example, during the pandemic, one of the biggest losses that the students experienced was their lack of meaningful connection was not sort of being met. We recognize that the world all over is going through a crisis of connection, social skills like sharing, cooperation, listening to others, perspective taking, building relationships, making friends. All of these things are sort of getting severely impacted as we're sort of going into our silos. We recognize that we're by nature social beings, and learning and development is heavily influenced by our social interactions. So what we decided to do as a school, as a whole community, was to really take the pandemic as an opportunity to renew our social connections to others, renew our emotional connections to ourselves. We did a whole bunch right through junior, middle, and senior school. we sort of devised a whole plan where we're going to look at one-on-one or class connect. We looked at ways in which we could make sure there's community engagement that's happening, where there is avenues which are made for teacher and student connect. And also, this time has been tough on us as teachers. We've had to sort of develop new skills. We've had to develop, we've personally also been reeling with a lot of loss and a lot of different things. So we looked at teacher wellness also. So our vision sort of became broad that when we're looking at sort of SEL, we're going to look at SEL for the entire community, and it'll have the same sort of idea, but it'll look different for each kind of community. I'll share a couple of quick examples of what we really did. One practice that we began with the senior school based on fostering connection was we got students to share 4-minute presentations every morning where they could share anything. I've given some examples of things that they could share about, which was not sort of academic.
So Wednesday को मिलते हैं.
Yeah, which was not academic or sort of performance or evaluative in nature. And the larger idea really behind this was that we get students to share different aspects of their self, which they would have shared during breaks, during lunchtime, during like their corridor interactions. And actually, when we sort of started doing this, we saw magic start to happen. There were students who were sharing their artwork, writing their quirky interests. We initiated a process where there was sort of questions that students were asked to ask each other about, hey, how did you figure this out? What is it that you like? And what we saw were that students slowly over the course of some months started finding common ground when we were really doubting whether in this sort of pandemic, in the absence of physical connection, they'll be able to find common ground. They shared quotes that they liked, they shared questions that they were sort of working with. So this is just a small practice that every morning, and we had a roster where students were sharing at a continuous level. We also sort of did another practice where this is a fairly common tool by the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence called the Mood Meter. So we encouraged our teachers, we trained our teachers on how to use this tool, and we got our teachers to sort of also identify, like what we were doing in the beginning of the session that Jayashree led, that what's the mood that you're feeling right now? And really looking at sort of identifying, building emotional vocabulary for us community, and saying that emotions can be sort of experienced on a scale of energy and pleasantness. And none of these are wrong or right or good or bad or higher or lower. Each one of these things in itself has a learning opportunity sort of associated with it. And if students sort of start to identify this for themselves, build vocabulary, then we can sort of start to see how to better identify with their needs and how to sort of cater to those also. I can share some, just a second. Jayashree, will it be possible for someone to share the presentation? Because I think my link is just suddenly stopped working.
Okay, fine. So I can do that. Just a minute. It will take me a little while to open it.
Yeah. I'll pause at this point. If somebody has any questions while Jayashree sort of setting
yeah.
that up, I'll take some questions up from anybody if they have any.
Please feel free to drop in your comments or ask if you have some questions in mind. Or if one of you has something to share about what you're doing in school, maybe you could have a quick brief sharing.
So if I may share.
Yes, please.
Go for it.
So, so I'm working with the primary program at Heritage, and one of the things that was very powerful for us was that we had students take the ownership of doing breathing exercises in the morning and doing tapping exercises in the morning and coming up with positive affirmations. So it was the children so again, we had a roster in place and that was shared with the parents, and children used to come up with different breathing activities. So they came up with star breathing and octopus breathing and fish breathing. So it was very interesting to see them take the onus of all these things, and then they used to share a positive affirmation every day for the entire class. So one child would come up and share. So it was very interesting to see that.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Anchal. I know it's when children take ownership, it's nothing like that, because the whole idea of having something like this and these routines and structures is to have student voice and to have students become the center of everything that happens in the classroom. Yeah, thanks for that. Yes, Sankalp, I've been able to share the screen. Is this all right?
Uh,
The next one?
I am unable to see what you're sharing. Hang on.
Is everybody else able to
Yeah,
see?
perfect. Perfect. Yeah. Can you actually move to the next slide?
Yeah, sure. Yes. Is this the one?
So, yeah, perfect. Thanks for sharing that, Aanchal. Yeah, Aanchal and her team sort of led that beautifully with the junior students, and it was actually a real big pleasure and a highlight, at least of my day, when I would go in to do some observations and see these kids share beautifully. The point that I want to sort of go back to in terms of really looking at what can we do inside the classroom. And as teachers, there are multiple opportunities that we have to start looking at what are some content and or pedagogy adjustments that we can make to incorporate SEL in a more tangible way into our lesson planning, into our structure of the time that we're doing. A quick example of this that I can share with everyone is we did a session with the science team. Jashi, would you be able to move to the next slide?
Yeah.
So one of the big topics that teachers oftentimes feel really skeptical about talking, or there is a lot of hush-hush that sometimes goes around, is sexuality, body changes. So when teachers start to sort of discuss these topics from 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and there's a whole arc, what we realized was that these are actually, they can be made into SEL lessons. They can sort of have an SEL component in that. So right from before starting off a topic, we discussed with class that with the class that what are rights you need to have in order to feel safe talking about body changes, sexual health. What would you need to do to make your classmates feel safe? What responsibilities can you agree on to take for the whole class to be successful? So that the students are sort of students who also want to ask questions which are shock questions or questions which are maybe not supportive, they get into the more right sort of frame of mind to be able to take this forward. Jashi, could we move to the next slide? And really creating opportunities where students have the option to say that, okay, there are all of these things that you have the right to feel, to ask, to question. Yeah. Jashi, can we, yeah. And in any one of these topics, there is an SEL component that we can sort of build in, which talks about, which could sort of, again, include why are some people more comfortable discussing some body parts than others? What are pressures people have to feel or look a certain way? Oh, definitely, Monica, thanks for that question. This is very much possible in the online mode. All the things that I was referring to with the sharing and these lessons, we actually ended up doing in the online mode. And I'll share some results of what students also sort of shared and spoke about. The only idea was that if we sort of set up the right context, And if the students know that we can sort of make a holding space for these kind of questions, then they can sort of go into this in a much more sort of deeper way. All right, Jeshi, can we move to the next part? Yeah, we can get done with this example. All right, we can move on from here, yeah. This was another question that was asked to me while I was sort of preparing for this webinar, that how can teachers really understand the whole child? So I'll share with you a little personally about my training as a teacher at Mirambika began 12 years ago, and the focus was really looking on the child as a whole and not segmented parts. So I'm not going to go into the theory of integral education, but it was an intellectual and a practical realization to a great extent that the child is not the sum of parts, but you really have to have that holonomy in mind to work with the child. But as I sort of progressed in my teaching and I came into sort of more formal schools, I realized that I was made to feel that I was more accountable for results, a teacher who's rated based on the book looks that were done, course outline if I was able to meet, and things like that. And these ideas were great to improve my teaching skills and effectiveness, but I also realized that they were incomplete, and I had to integrate my new learning of managing classroom and all of these things with the idea of my Mirambika training. And teacher feedback at that point used to be really important. And what I realized was that students who were the direct stakeholders, they weren't being asked for their input. So I sort of used this form that you can see that Jeshi is sharing about the explicit and the implicit curriculum. And you can find this online quite easily. This sort of division led me down to a more introspective path of how to be a more effective teacher, of not just really catering to the intellect, but to the human being as a whole, to the human being who has an emotional and a spiritual side to them. And when we're sort of looking at efficacy, we can't just sort of go on narrow rubrics, but we have to look at the social and emotional health of the classroom. And sort of doing this allowed me to better go into my classroom and be a more sort of create a more authentic relationship with my students. And that really sort of started from the place of having a more authentic relationship with myself. So when we're sort of looking at the whole child, there are so many different aspects that we really need to look at. I know my time is up, so I'm going to pause over here for questions or general discussions, and I can sort of speak to these things a little bit more. I have more examples and results from surveys that we've taken with students of how all of this actually worked online. So Jeshi, we can stop sharing if you want.
Sankalp, if you feel you would want a couple of minutes to show something that might be really helpful, you can just go on. I mean, it's okay.
Okay. So in that case, I'll just sort of get to in terms of what are we really doing, just to sort of finish off this question of what can teachers do to understand the whole child. If you can move to the next slide. I realized that, and this is what we implemented with the teachers, that what we really need to look at with teachers is certain mindset shifts and certain skill buildings. As practitioners, teachers were very encouraged when we were presenting these plans to them, but there was some sort of skill deficit that they were able to identify that, how do we do these things inside the classroom? So we created a lot of workshops for them, which could sort of build their skill around it. What we also encouraged all of them to do was to start more a self-reflective journey on what are the mindsets that could sort of hamper SEL work inside the classroom, in terms of what is our relation to our own emotions. What are some myths we carry around emotions? Do we see emotions as a binary, or do we start to see emotions as a spectrum? Do we see emotions as hindrances or something that hold me back? or do we feel the need to always adopt a positive state of mind? These are all things that we sort of fall back into. And we sort of created this space where teachers worked on these questions for themselves. And we did workshops with them where we came to the realization that our emotions are rationally sort of arise to provide really key insights into our passions, our life purpose, our value systems, our needs, and also sometimes our underlying wounds that need attentive healing. We had to sort of break the chain of the need for perpetual positivity, and sort of really study our own emotional surfaces and depths to sort of be able to lead a more conscious life, and then sort of go with that understanding into the classroom, where the teacher was not necessarily being, how do I say this, someone who's a preacher, but is more a facilitator of these ideas. So these are things that we did with the teachers. We did workshops around mindset shifts, around things that could help them build their skill. Jashri, if we could move on to the next slide. Yeah. The next one. So yeah, I think I'll pause over here and I'll wait for some questions. These are just, I just wanted to show, these are sort of dispositions that we can pick up as teachers when we're sort of looking at how do we take these things into the classroom. These are dispositions where we can start to sort of take into our own lives. And once we sort of start practicing these, then we can start to take this into the classroom. And the idea really is that we don't have to be perfect at these things before we take them into the classroom. I've worked with a lot of senior teachers, and one of the things that I always got back was that, oh, I have to be really sure of the content of what I'm teaching. And what we pushed back on with the teachers was that this is not content you're teaching. SEL is really you're walking along the journey with them. Like was shared earlier, that it's really a journey of self-discovery. And the more you sort of choose to be vulnerable and walk on that path, you're able to sort of take your students along and create a space where we're learning from each other. And we're just maybe certain, like more experienced adults in the room. So yeah, I'll pause now, Jayashree, and I'll wait for questions and stuff.
Sankalp, should I stop sharing?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Great. So I think some very profound things there, Sankalp. It's about being vulnerable. It's about understanding yourself, how much aware you are about yourself, and acknowledging your own vulnerability so that you can then be, you're in a position to really facilitate and not preach inside the classroom. I think these were some very important things. And actually, my memory goes back to when I was inside the classroom and when I used to kind of facilitate circle time and, SEL sessions. What I realized is it is extremely important for a teacher to acknowledge his or her own biases, his or her own prejudices, because it's natural. We all have strong opinions many times, and you can't help it having strong opinions. But what is important is probably for you to be aware of what your prejudices are, what your biases are, and acknowledge them as biases and as prejudices, so that when you are having a discussion in the class on really sensitive issues, you are not kind of, even by mistake, letting out your opinion to the students. You should be able to kind of have and facilitate a very neutral, objective conversation. So it's not impossible, because I have been there, done it. But it's the first step is to be able to acknowledge that you are prejudiced. Right? So that in that sense, self-awareness is extremely important for teachers. And I think so what Priya and Sankalp are saying by, working with teachers is probably helping teachers realize these things and then getting ready to work with students, right? So Priya and Sankalp, anything more on what I said? You want to add on something? I'm sure the audience would love to listen.
I think the only point that I'd like to reinforce is that the sustainability of an SEL journey lies in teachers taking it ahead. So especially for our work, I mean, we are an NGO partner. We don't want to be working there for the next 50 years. right? Or even the next 5 years for that matter. Which is why our entire plan to scale and plan to sustainability is that I'm not conducting the session. I don't have an SEL coordinator going into the school and conducting the session for the teachers. The teachers are conducting the sessions themselves, and it's only when they conduct the session themselves that they experience the change that happens to me. So when many of our teachers, we have an entire series of activities on discovering self-worth. They realize that I'm also at the age of 45, at the age of 36, at the age of 32, I'm discovering my self-worth. As I'm getting teachers, so these kind of exercises that, and it's based on my life. So when a child is thinking of his or her life, automatically I think of my life, because I'm inviting him to walk on this path and I step on it myself. I found myself in the classroom doing it subconsciously too.
Right.
Suddenly realizing, I'm not even participating, but I am.
Yeah.
So that's how I think the sustainability of this, because it's not something that's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Today, everybody is talking about SEL because the pandemic has forced it on us. But if I look at, and I cross my fingers while saying this, a year from now, let's assume things are back to what they were and children are in schools. And are we going to stop SEL because now ab sab theek hai? So we don't need SEL. That's not, SEL has required, the pandemic has preempted it and made it a focus.
True.
But it's a journey we are going to walk on. So how are we readying ourselves to do this? There are a lot of questions on online mode.
Yes.
This is just one thing I'd like to. So we've been struggling, as I said, we've been trying different things. Our teachers are also struggling. They have added access issues because their children don't have access to data or phones. But I think what's happening to children is also that everyone has to stay ahead of the curve and ahead of the game. So teachers have to do an activity. Maybe they'll come up with one idea. In 2-3 weeks, children will be bored of it because they're sitting at home and there's nothing else that's happening. So one of the ways is to, I think, keep innovating and keep looking at newer things that you can stay ahead of children's boredom. Very difficult to do because
Yeah.
there's nothing else that's happening in a child's life. He gets up, does something, sits for online class, watches TV, and the day finishes pretty much in the same way. So, you'll do something innovative, children will love it for 2 weeks. After that, they're bored of it again. So I think that's one, and it's really difficult on teachers to stay ahead of children's boredom levels.
Right. Yeah, Sankalp, so if you could also speak a little more about this online thing, but then specific questions on what are we supposed to do to deter positive SEL environment in the classroom? What are we not supposed to do to deter positive SEL environment in the classroom? I think what Raina is asking is how can we kind of keep it going and not really go away from it so that we keep at it. That's one. And Sneha is again asking, she's also asking about how can we connect with our students on an online platform. So I think something what Priya said, if you could also elaborate from your experience.
Sure. I'll share two things. I think it's an interesting thing to think about in terms of what Priya just shared about. One aspect is children's boredom that we need to sort of cater to. So I think one way of looking at it is that we come up with things that are fun, play, joy, creative, innovative, and we sort of cater to that. In my experience, what I've seen, we've been running the SEL program now for 5 years. Much before the pandemic started, and I hope it will continue much after the pandemic ends. What we've sort of realized is that children also have a deep need to make meaning, and sure, joy, fun, play is one way they make meaning, but if you intellectually sort of push them, they also respond to that really well. Even in the online sort of space, we've seen with children, they have come up with, like in the 4-minute cruise shares that I was talking about, they've come up with some deeply meaningful things that were sort of personal to them and they've shared in their larger classrooms. The themes that I haven't spoken about right now that we've sort of created, because each one of these SEL programs has been anchored in a theme, like what Jashi mentioned about in my bio, that with 8th grade, we're looking at religion and identity development. With 9th grade, we're looking at gender and identity development. With 10th grade, we're looking at philosophical inquiry. and again, identity development. Each one of these themes, students were also deeply interested in, and they were able to sort of, and some of these things, whether it was controversial, what we were discussing, or whether it was in the online mode, worked out really well with the students. They had good questions to sort of ask. And how I can sort of say this is because, one, I was conducting the lessons. Two, we also did like these extensive surveys with students about how they felt that the lessons were. We also sort of did a triangulation of what were the projects they were doing in the online mode. They were setting up their newspaper websites. They were setting up projects on, and I'll share the links in the chat about where they were talking about projects that they could, where the LGBTQ community and creating space for open sharing and making more inclusive spaces, where they were doing projects on the reforestation of the Aravallis. And so we could really help them also tap into a whole bunch of things that were deeply sort of personal to them. To sort of go to the question of what are we supposed to not do to deter a positive SEL environment in the classroom? I think I found it really powerful as a self-check that I am not here to sort of change what the students are going to say, do, feel. I'm going to create a holding space where students can feel all of those feelings, where each one of those feelings is welcome, where they can, without judgment, say the things which they will only have access to say in their friends group or in spaces in online communities where they're not going to get good adult supervision or holding. I do a lot of work with the boys in ninth grade around what it means to be a man. How do we choose to sort of, what does masculinity mean to us? Some of the questions that the boys ask me, they would never ask another adult. But the fact that we've done the groundwork, where we've done the pre-work, where they're able to sort of ask me about a whole bunch of different things of what it means to be a man and what are questions that they're dealing with, what are the ways in which they police each other's masculinity, what is it, how do abuses work, all of these things. And when they're able to sort of ask these questions, even though some of them are very heavy, I feel that in itself sort of creates an environment for sharing and reflection. So for me, I don't think the environment has to be overtly sort of positive. It has to be more that you're going to listen to them. They're going to have an adult in their life that they can turn to, that they're going to feel held in the questions that they have. And neither their questions, nor their thinking, nor their emotion is wrong. So that's the real sort of thing that we can embody as the adults in the room. That would be my sort of two bits on it.
Great, wonderful. So I have one more question in the chat asked by Arsha. Yes, Priya, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something. So Sonali Ocha, who's designed our curriculum, uses a word "therav," and I think it's the Hindi word that describes what Sankalp is talking about really in the classroom. It's a place of stillness, a place of holding, and I don't find a English word really that captures the nuances of that word. So that's one thing that I wanted to add. And I just wanted to ask Sankalp that because, you've been doing this program with the children even prior to the pandemic, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So is that why there is a familiarity and comfort level with discussing issues of this level online? Because, I was going through the questions on the chat as well. So in this situation, at what level does one start? Because, would 15-year-old boys be open to discussing issues on sexuality online starting now? Or is it something that has to be built up over the groundwork that you referred to, which then online, offline is just a medium because the space is comfortable in any case?
Right.
Thanks for that question, Priya. What we realized was that, so the ninth grade students, when their theme is gender and identity development, they will not do anything around gender in grade 8. So when we start off the gender and identity theme with them in grade 9, it all starts off currently in the last 1 year, it's all been online. So they'll start off afresh. There's a whole curriculum arc that we've made, which starts with how to ask these questions. There's a whole like 400-page workbook that the teachers have where they can sort of go in and what are some of these are questions that will come up. These are questions that can be asked. How do you respond to them? And you don't have to have an answer, but again, like I said, you have to have a holding space. So I think the good part is that we didn't start this program off during the pandemic. So we've had, and what we're doing with the students now is probably like version 2.5. So we did in the first year, we did something, we took feedback from teachers and students, we reworked on it, we went back again, we did version 2. And what in the pandemic we ended up doing was version 2.5. So we already knew that some of these things work with the students. But from a student point of view, we also had doubts about whether they will be sharing online. But to our surprise, that once the sort of things were done from the get-go in a certain way, there was a lot of openness that we sort of received. If it's okay, Jayashree, I'll quickly just share some data around that. This is just an example of how we've shared all of this curriculum with the teachers. We have like these online resources where each teacher has access to these lesson plans and the curriculum arcs. We have subject integration workshops that we've done with them, because just doing standalone SEL work doesn't necessarily sort of help. It has to sort of be woven into a whole bunch of different things. We do work with the parents. This is some of the survey results. This was done with about 170 students, these questions. This is specifically aligned to the gender theme that we were talking about. And if I was to sort of zoom out a little bit, we also did surveys with students around the general health, the social and emotional health, which I was referring to earlier, as to what they feel inside the classrooms. The results that we got, I mean, if I was to compare them in the pandemic versus the non-pandemic years, I think we were able to fairly maintain where we were at. And these are just some sort of indicators of that. So yeah, I'll pause right now.
Yeah. So that was one question that was there in my mind about assessment, but I'll come to that a little later because I see a few questions here. So Sushma wants to know, how were these sessions managed with respect to timetable? Were they also a part of subject periods? So that's one. And I'll just read out the other question as well. Noel Rosario says, if there is a blended learning going to happen in future, how are we going to handle them 50% from home and 50% in school? So either you, Sankalp, or Priya, if you want to take this, one of these two questions, anyone can answer. So the first one is was it a part of subject classes as well from Sushma? And the other one is, how are we going to go ahead with 50% in school and 50% at home? How are we going to have these? So, in this context, you could also address, because we've heard that there are some schools who, have dropped SEL because on the online space, they thought it wasn't happening. So circle time wasn't happening well. So they've just kind of dropped it. So if you could also kind of have something to say for them in the same thing as 50% at home, 50% at school, how are we going to manage?
I think that's a difficult question to answer. Everyone is trying to figure out how to really do that. But in terms of timetable, I think SEL, it's about social emotional teaching and learning practices both. So yes, we've been lucky to have an allocated period in the school when it was on, and whenever school starts, we will continue to do so. But the tools and techniques and the little tricks that are learned in SEL can be learned across subject periods too. So for example, so we have a small little technique of holding maybe a yellow ball in your hand while speaking. It gives the child confidence to talk, especially children who are afraid to speak. Now that can be used in an SEL classroom. It can be used in any classroom. Asking, so, or in the middle of the class when things are just too rowdy, kids are chaotic, then you do a clapping, tapping, something. So you can use tools and techniques that are SEL based across subject periods. So that's how they were really used in the timetable. So that's my, little bit of input on that.
Yeah. Okay.
I would just like to sort of add to that, I think having dedicated standalone time is essential. So as teachers over here, please make sure that your leaders know and push them that if they're dropping this, that no, we cannot, this is the basis of any learning that can happen. So if you're not doing this, then we're sort of impinging on any potential learning that can happen. So I think dedicated time is required. But I completely agree with Priya about the idea that this also needs to be built up into subjects. If it's only done through a specific time where students know, I work largely with older students. When they know, oh, SEL class ho rahi hai, or circle time ho raha hai, class teacher period hai, we'll wear our hat with what the teachers want to hear and know, and we'll parrot those things out. So the students also need a space where these things are more organic in nature. So structures in the timetable where these things can sort of come up more organically. So morning time, closing time can be structures that we can have. Structures also in terms of every class, how are you going to start a class? Are you going to dedicate 5 to 7 minutes of your class to manage certain things? If you see an issue coming up in your teaching class, are you going to wait for an SEL period? No, you're going to sort of address it there and then. In the subjects that you're teaching, what are the topics that you're choosing? There are so many opportunities. As a math teacher, I found teaching direct and inverse proportion and bringing in so much SEL into that, teaching compound interest and bringing in so much SEL into that. So there are definite inputs that we need to sort of have also into our subject work that sort of has an SEL lens into it.
Yeah, just to add on, my memory goes back to when I was teaching the human body, and then we did a lot about body image issues. So the SEL was all about body image. Why do we tease each other about the way we look, about the skin, about the color? I mean, it really blended so well when we were teaching human body and all the different systems in the body. So yeah, so it's about just kind of thinking, and when you work collaboratively, in a teacher group, I think a lot of things get solved that way also. A lot of issues, a lot of new ideas come up. Yeah, so I'm going to ask one more very interesting question here from Asha. She asks, when you put on a mood meter in class, what can we then do to change the mood for learning? That's a very...
I will send, Asha, thank you for that question. I'm sorry I missed out on that in the chat. The mood meter, just go do your own research on it. I'll send you a small YouTube link on it. The idea is that each one of those 4 quadrants has an associated learning style with it. So we don't need to shift the mood of our students, whereas we need to recognize where they're at and adapt our teaching strategy to match that mood. As teachers, we have so many tools in our exhaustive tool belt of teaching that if I know that my class is going to be energized today, it's going to be sort of more in the red zone, then if I try and do a lesson with them, which is going to be very, very sort of, you have to write and you have to do this. No, it will not work. I know my well-planned lesson is not. So I know that, okay, I have to cover a content, but this class is too energized and worked up today. Can I ensure that, oh, there's a debate that I'm going to do? The same topic I'm going to do through debate. If my class is feeling a little sullen, a little moody, and if I want to, at that point, try and do a debate, it's not going to work. So how can I adapt my strategy, my teaching skill, my lesson plan to the needs of the student? I think that becomes, when we're sort of thinking again about shifting mood of students, I understand that that's a practice that we've employed on ourselves and on our own emotions. But I don't know. I personally feel we can meet the students where they're at rather than only trying to move them along. I mean, it's a blended way of doing it. Sometimes you maybe also need to move them along. So I don't know. That's my bit to it.
Thank you, Sankalp. And we are already past 6 o'clock, but then one quick question that's been in my mind. I'm sure the audience also would like to know, how is there a way of assessing the socio-emotional learning? We always learn, assess everything else that the children learn. So is it important to assess? And if yes, what are some of the ways that you've tried, or Priya, even you, one of you could, or even if both of you have something, a quick response to this?
I think the principle of the assessment that we are hoping to do when things get back on track is social, to go back to my theme of this entire, what I've been talking about is life has been a journey of self-discovery. It is the same for children too. So I'm not somebody who's going to assess that, Sankalp is at X level on his own emotional scale. I'm not going to label, assess, evaluate. But can I look at a tool that helps a child assess where am I today and where do I want to go? And if one can look at assessment which is self-driven, because it's about my emotions, so you assessing where I am on those emotions um, doesn't really, it doesn't fit, it doesn't sink there. So I think that's the principle we're really looking at, is in whichever assessment we do, we can facilitate, we can guide. That's the role we would play, but
Yeah.
the assessment really is of the child, by the child.
Yeah. Sankalp, you want to say something that you've tried?
Yeah, I completely agree with Priya about the assessment and it largely being something which is driven by the self. And I think that that's very important. I think just to sort of add to that, when we're sort of assessing any one of these things, our idea behind assessment is not evaluative in nature in terms of making a hierarchy or how we as teachers do normal assessment. The idea is more to get a temperature check. We've every year we've done something with the students. We've always done surveys, which two types of surveys. So one survey will correspond to the general lessons, that SEL lessons that have been done, which will include we do overnight workshops with students and a whole bunch of these different things. So it'll do an assessment of the survey, the SEL content. The other is a general health check of their learning experience, of what it is. Do they feel like they belong in the community? Do they feel like they have an adult that they can turn to? Do they feel like they're part of a larger system? So questions around those things. And again, it has the same strain of it being a self-assessed sort of thing, but it gives the leadership, it gives the team a lot to sort of focus on, that what is it that we need to focus on next year? What are the changes that we need to make? I definitely think I'm a big believer that any program that you're running has to be evaluated. Otherwise, it's sort of going down the right of one person's vision and mission. And I don't think that's sort of, we've reached a point in education where these things need to be sort of evaluated for efficacy. But the idea of efficacy needs to be broader, not narrow. So I'll sort of leave it at that.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for that. And yes, and to also assessing kind of helps us, as you said, is it really working, and what are the things that we need to change for the next year? So that also is important to assess. And I think as far as SEL goes, as Priya said, I totally agree. It is not up to the teacher to assess the student. It's always a self-assessment, and could be also maybe sometimes peer assessment. So that also helps. So great. Thanks for all that insight. And I wish we could go on with this, because there are so many questions in my mind, and I'm sure many of our audience also would love to ask some more questions, but then yeah, it's already 5 minutes past. So a quick summary of what we heard today is SEL takes different shapes inside the classroom. It could be standalone SEL lessons through activities. It could be also integrated through other subjects. But what is important is to have a structured time and also keep it flexible for teachers, and most importantly, get teachers prepared to take these sessions inside the classroom. So I think that's extremely important. And given today's times, SEL has really become very, very important. And relationships, when we talk about relationships, what the relationship between the teacher and the student, and also between students, and how they bond, and how they interact with one another also is extremely important for learning to thrive inside a classroom. So with that, I want to again thank Sankalp and Priya. Thank you very much. I know both of you are extremely busy, but you've willingly taken out time, and some very great insights from both of you, and from two different spaces. Sankalp is from a probably a very privileged, affluent international school, and Priya's experience is from the municipal schools in Pune. But I think what is common is SEL is important for kids wherever they are. Right. So I think as educators, that is something that we are taking away from today's session. Please tune in to our next session, which is a fortnight from today. We will once again see what does it take for leaders to implement an SEL, a culture in the school where SEL really thrives, inside the classroom, outside the classroom, with the community, school community on the whole. So please, we look forward to having you on what will be the date, I don't remember, but it's exactly 2 weeks from now